Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Diet and Lifestyle Strategies for Detoxification SNPs. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Deanna Minnick. My name is Michael Chapman, and I'm a medical education specialist at Genova's Asheville branch, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for today's webinar. We would like to welcome Dr. Deanna Minnick. Dr. Deanna Minnick is an internationally recognized lifestyle medicine expert, creative visionary, and author of 5 books. Her 20 years of experience in the nutrition and functional medicine fields led to development of integrative whole self approach to nutrition called Food and Spirit. In 2014, she launched the Certified Food and Spirit Practitioner Program to provide health professionals with a practical way to apply the food and spirit principles into clinical medicine. Dr. Minnick has had a diverse, well-rounded experience in the field of nutrition, including clinical practice, research, product formulation, marketing, writing, and education. She is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition, a certified nutrition specialist, certified nutritionist by the Washington State Department of Health, a certified functional medicine practitioner, and a registered yoga teacher. She is the author of 4 books on health and wellness and over 15 scientific publications. Currently, she is adjunct faculty for the Institute for Functional Medicine and 2 universities. Her passion is teaching a whole self approach to nourishment and bridging the gaps between science, spirituality, and art and medicine. And now I'm going to turn over the controls to Dr. Minnick. And again, thanks everyone for being here.
Okay, hello everybody. Great to be here with you all. So we have a big topic ahead of us for this hour, talking about diet and lifestyle strategies for detox. So I'm just going to dive in because, as Michael reminded me, I have lots of slides and lots of information, and so we definitely want to reserve some time for you to ask questions. So I'm going to more or less tell the story through these slides, and if there are things that pique your interest, please make a note of that, and then feel free to ask questions at the end or have further correspondence with us. So the first question I'll ask us all as a group here is nutrition important for detoxification? I think for some of you who know me, I've been working in this whole area of detoxification, especially in my early years with Dr. Jeffrey Bland, working at the Functional Medicine Research Center, and we really laid the groundwork for much in the way of this area of detoxification. And so I'm assuming that all of us would give a big resounding yes to this question. I do think that it's essential, and what we're seeing is that really and truly the amount of nutrition and how nourished somebody is a large determinant as to whether or not they are prone to toxicants. So, to that point, 5 reasons why toxic exposure could be a health issue. Why doesn't everybody get sick from exposure to environmental contaminants? And I've proposed these 5 reasons, and as you can see, number 3 is deficiency or insufficiency of nutrients. So it's not just being completely frank deficient, but being insufficient of different nutrients. And it's how these different nutrients come together. And we're going to get into that a bit more, of course. Most of you who have been in integrative medicine, functional medicine, nutritional medicine for some time know that there are 3 main biochemical, physiological phases of detoxification. And all of them require adequate nutrition. So the first phase is all about hydroxylation. We look at a lot of the primary cytochrome P450 enzymes that require different nutrient cofactors in order to work right. Then phase 2 is looking at conjugation. So the requirement there is for amino acids and different chemical groups in order to bind to the biotransformed metabolites formed from phase 1. Then we move into phase 3, which is elimination and excretion. And of course, we do need proper nutrition for that. So I'm going to be talking about these different phases and their individual nutritional requirements. So what I really like was this article that was published not too long ago, just in 2014. And the authors suggested that suboptimal or unhealthy nutrition actually makes toxins worse in the body. So physiologically, we're going to have a greater, more amplified response. Whereas if we are healthy and have better adequate nutrient status, we can decrease or blunt or buffer the effects of toxins in the body. So first and foremost, I think many of us as practitioners, we think about all the different toxins that our patients might be exposed to. And indeed, the list is overwhelming. And a lot of that we have no control over. It's hard to control the quality of air in our environment. It's hard to control water quality wherever we go. So what we can control within is the amount that we are nourished and how we are nourished and how we're doing that. So when patients get filled with fear because they're hearing so much about detox and toxins, one of the places I bring them back to is the locus of control for them is their nourishment and being sure that we're personalizing their nourishment. It's not just a broad spectrum approach, but that we're also going deeper into the individual needs of the patient. So first and foremost, I'm sure many of you have used the elimination diet. We use that a lot, and this is just an easy way to cut the noise and reduce that signal that's coming into the body repeatedly throughout the day. So any number of Genova's food allergy tests would be a wonderful place to start. And if you choose to do the elimination diet after that, and have that tailored a bit, I think that is a wonderful approach. Some practitioners just dive in straight away and just do a standard elimination diet, which will cover most ground for most people, but there will need to be some tweaks because obviously there are going to be things on the elimination diet even that may be problematic for certain people. But that's first and foremost. And if we look at the science on the elimination diet, there are some articles out there that do support the use of it. This one was published back in 2000, but essentially showed that just 7 days of an elimination diet plus a detox protein powder. So it wasn't just the diet itself, but it was this combination of the two having a statistically significant reduction in MSQ scores, 47%. And in fact, I've seen even higher numbers than this with exactly the approach that they've done. It just kind of depends on the patient group, who you're choosing. This was in healthy women, so you're not starting from a very elevated baseline with respect to symptoms. Here is a study that I was involved with at the Functional Medicine Research Center. These were women with fibromyalgia, and we had them on a 4-week program with an elimination diet plus a medical powder that contained all different phytonutrients for detoxification, and they had a wonderful relief of symptoms across the board: pain, stiffness, a lot of their trigger points, and this seemed to be correlated with the degree of amalgams that they had. So if you get the paper and read a little bit more, you'll see what we did there exactly. But the power of the elimination diet is really huge. I think that because we're always confronted with food throughout the day, we have this potential constant exposure to toxins. And these are toxins that, most of them anyway, that we can control. So let me just talk briefly about fasting and juice cleanses, because the question always comes up. And I do think that one of the reasons why the word detox gets such a bad reputation is because of all of the stringent, extremist type measures out there in order to try to cleanse the body. And what we do know is that extreme fasting, and I've seen this in patients as well, where they do online internet programs where they think that they're doing good things for themselves by engaging in all of these different cleanses that are out there, but they're very extreme, and these patients are chronically ill. So it can further lead to exacerbations in nutrient deficiencies. And what I have seen is edema and more pain. So, and people think, well, isn't that a healing crisis? Well, I am not of the belief, and this is based on my experience, when detox is done right, that there really needs to be a healing crisis in the way of seeing a perturbation of symptoms. I think that this means that we're going off course. So sometimes we see that with these extreme measures. Caloric restriction, this is a hot topic right now. Intermittent fasting, looking at all the different ways to just start eating less. And when we do that, we actually start to mobilize many of the lipophilic toxins that have stored within our adipose tissue. So keep that in mind, that we can actually become more toxic through the process of fasting as we're starting to mobilize these lipophilic toxins. But is there a place for it? I think that there can be, and in some patients, and I would say that the healthier of that spectrum of patients, that there may be some ways to incorporate lessened eating time or lessened intake in some way. So intermittent feeding, time-restricted feeding, periodic fasting, there are all these different ways to engage and to really just become more mindful and aware around our food intake. And I think that can help mitochondrial health, energy, neurological health. We're already seeing some of those indications. But this would never be my first line approach to detoxification. This would be a sequenced approach that I would take with a patient over time as I'm monitoring their symptoms, making sure that they're feeling well before we're engaging in something more rigorous like this. So if we are going to have patients do a fast correctly, of course, making sure that they're adequately hydrated, that the foods that they are eating are the most nutrient dense, because now we're going to have to be even more selective about what the patient is taking in. And so oftentimes what I'll use for this is a dietary supplement, protein powder that I know is already primed for detox. And to be looking at their symptoms. If they have dizziness, fatigue, this can create all kinds of problems. And it can really just alter somebody's function. So they're not going to be able to perform at work as well. They're going to get tired. They may have accidents. So there's a time and a place to do fasting. So I do think it fits within detox, but not for the mainstream. I think for the select few where you can monitor their progress a little bit more extensively. Okay, so what do you do first? So as we're talking about diet and nutrition lifestyle strategies for detox, you need to first know what their diet and lifestyle is through their daily life. What does that look like? What is that snapshot? So I use a couple of different forms for this depending on the type of consultation that I'm doing with a patient. The Institute for Functional Medicine has the Diet, Nutrition, and Lifestyle Journal, which I help them to create, just having a sense of the foods that we take in, the lifestyle at the bottom. There's a way to do that. I have my own form that I've designed as well, which is more color-coded. Doesn't matter what you use. Just find a way to track food, drink, and all of the different measures of life, if you can. So looking at stress, looking at sleep, looking at activity, looking at mental, emotional, spiritual health, I think is important. If you can capture it all in one form, that's really the way to do it, or if you're using an app. And then you can look at your patient's diet. Where are they on the spectrum? So are they more toxic, or are they a little bit less toxic and having more nutrients in their diet? So when we're looking for toxic exposures here, here's where I'm asking the patient, because they don't always write these things, if they're having soup, well, do they make soup from out of a can or out of a UHT container, or, where was the soup from? Was it bought from the store or from a restaurant, from a deli? It's so many different questions here as we get into toxic exposures. And then looking at the quality of the foods that they are eating. Are they eating refined oils? Are they eating high amounts of sugar? What about artificial sweeteners? How often are they having fish? So this is why I typically ideally shoot for 7 days when I'm first seeing somebody. And then if I've seen them already and I get a good established baseline of how they're eating, then I look for 3 consecutive days with 1 weekend day and then 2 weekdays. So either Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because people eat different on the weekends than they do on the weekdays. So what is detoxifying? So here you're asking specific questions. If they had an apple and they wrote down one medium apple, you need to ask them about whether or not it was organic. Or just looking at the colors of their food is also going to tell you something. I'm really big into that. I think that in fact, I have a whole book on this where I'm really looking at the colors, the phytonutrients in food, and how those non-nutritive substances and oftentimes pigments in food are priming these detox pathways. So lots of things to be looking on that checklist. Now, there is some controversy about eating organic. Is it really worth the price? And I would say if we're talking toxicity here, it is worth the price. And it's worth the price on two fronts. One is you're reducing the incoming toxic burden by reducing pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. And secondly, you're actually eating more nutrient-dense foods. So those foods, because they don't have the displacement of the different chemicals affixing to the structure inside the plant, you actually are getting more nutrients per gram of matter. So on both sides of the equation, I think it's a good thing. If a patient can't afford it, should they make selective choices? Yes. See environmental working groups, Dirty Dozen, Clean 15 list, and they update that on an annual basis. So I'm showing you a study here that was done in children where they were looking at just the organophosphorus pesticide markers. And what they did was they tracked the children's intake of conventional and then organic food, and these are the same kids. And you can see how the levels of the pesticide go up when they're not eating organic. And then when they are eating the organic food, it drops down. And so it's nice to see that, number one, that happens so rapidly, and number two, that just swapping food from conventional to organically grown made such a difference. So there is some good science out there to support it, and I think it's one of those things, again, that puts us back into the locus of control. So one of the things you're going to see as we go through this presentation that's going to pop up time and time again is this idea of plants. So I don't subscribe to a dietary dogma. I do believe and know that for the 21st century, everything has to be personalized. So for some people, paleo is going to be better. For other people, more flexitarian. For others, vegan or maybe vegetarian. I'm not loyal to any of those dietary paths. What I am loyal to is the one thing that all of them share in common, which is plants. All different types of eating in some way involve the incorporation of plants. May not be the same plants, but we're all in some way eating plants. I have yet to find a dietary approach that doesn't do that. And I'm sure that there are some, but for the most part, most people are eating plants. So what I'm starting to see in the literature is, as you see the citation here at the bottom, fruit and vegetable intake influences the association between exposure to polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and a marker of oxidative stress in pregnant women. More and more of these studies are coming out suggesting that plants are protective against toxins. And so as we go through the presentation, you're actually going to see this borne out in multiple ways as we discuss the pathways. But I want to bring you back to the cornerstone, which is this. If you have this understanding at a very high level, then you're always going to come back to this: colorful, whole plant foods with great variety. That's my general takeaway. But I'll take you through all the specifics, of course. So now let's get into SNPs, because this is how we do personalize nutrition. This is one of the elements. There are food preferences that we also need to take into account, and environmental things, where the person lives. But in general, the way that we think of personalized nutrition is to work with SNPs. So let's start with the cytochrome P450 enzymes. And for those of you who use the Genova tests, they have multiple different types of tests looking at genomics. They really are the experts in this. So they have tests in which you can look at the phase 1 and phase 2 systems to see where there are some variants. so that you know how you can accommodate for those variants with nutrients. So one of the articles that I wrote in combination with a colleague 2 years ago, and you can get this article, it's open access, just go to PubMed, just type in my last name in 2015, it should come up, you can download it, is we looked at, it's a 24-page article in which all of the different foods and bioactives are reviewed for their effects on the different detoxification pathways. So looking at phase 1, looking at phase 2, looking at NERF2, looking at this is the inherent way that the body helps to get things out of the body through its own antioxidant response element. And then also metallothionein. So I'm going to take you through each of these pathways and talk about nutrients. But you can also download the article and get quite a lot of information there as well, because I'm just hitting the highlights here. So while I love SNPs, because it's really a gateway to personalized nutrition, there are some things to note. I don't think that they're perfect. They're not the be-all and end-all. There's some strong research and clinical data that are lacking. They really should not be seen in isolation. They should be seen together with functional biomarkers. So when I think of something like methylation, do we just want to be looking at COMT and MTHFR? No, we want to be looking at status of B vitamins in the body. We want to be looking at whether or not a patient is deficient for B12, B6, and really looking at the bigger picture and also their symptoms. So just note that SNPs are great. You know, we're hedging out there. It's been 14 years now since the completion of the Human Genome Project. So this research, I would say, is emerging, but it's still nascent. We have still so much to learn, and we're not even taking into account epigenetics, right? So with all of that in your clinical mind, let's move forward with the SNPs. So if you have patients that present with SNPs in the cytochrome P450 enzymes, what I want you to be thinking about here, these are a little bit tricky, and I would say my approach has been not to focus too much on just one of these cytochromes in isolation, because there's a lot of overlap and they're very inducible. But what the studies show is that when the body is replete with nutrients and has the proper vitamin and mineral cofactors, that these cytochrome enzymes can work well. So as you can see in the blue bubble on the right there, nutrient-dense foods and ensuring that your patient is getting the proper full spectrum of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. And if they're not, filling that gap with a good quality multivitamin and preferably some kind of phytonutrient addition or powder as well would be my approach. After toxins go through that first phase 1 process, they become a little bit more reactive. And so an antioxidant strategy is definitely warranted as part of a detox approach. And so when I'm thinking of antioxidants, there are so many out there. And really and truly, the complexity of the different ones is best. So think of further antioxidant support for those patients who have SNPs in phase 2. We haven't even gotten to phase 2, but just imagine that they're not able to actually get these things out of the body through phase 2, so they're kind of stuck with a lot of these very reactive compounds. So they need much more in the way of antioxidant support. These folks may also have oxidative stress in terms of their work life, their hobbies, and they just may be under additional stress. So looking at things like not just vitamin C, but the bioflavonoids that go together with vitamin C. Not just vitamin E, but the 8 isomers of vitamin E, the tocotrienols, together with the tocopherols, I always think are best. And that really just comes from my graduate work, looking at carotenoids and how these different plant compounds work in nature. So if we look at what fuels the body's way to create more antioxidant potential, It's through the antioxidant response element. I'm not going to go through all of the physiology on that. The takeaway for you is that when we looked into the foods that induce these enzymes, these are the list of the top ones. So fish oil, everything from fish oil to lycopene, curcumin, some of these things are bioactives, others of these are foods. So you can just note these just in terms of their ability to induce the body's own inherent system of being an antioxidant system. This recently came out. This just came out last year in February, looking at fermented foods and how they activate NRF2. And it looks like fermented foods contain specific catechol that upregulate the NRF2 system. So actually create more of this antioxidant potential in the body. So since we're talking about antioxidants, I thought it also might be worthwhile to show you a couple of studies in which giving supplements with a variety of different antioxidants helped with the exposure to toxins. So in this one in particular, I just like this because it's so simple. Giving antioxidants, vitamin E and vitamin C for 1 year to 15 workers exposed to lead compared with non-lead exposed workers. And what we know about lead, of course, is that it causes a lot of oxidative damage. And what they showed from the study was that having the antioxidants decrease the oxidative damage. So if you can't blunt the exposure to the toxicant, at least you can buffer the response in the body by having, again, those proper nutrients. Same thing here with a study on beta-carotene. So these were, I believe, factory workers in Mexico that were exposed to lead. They had a control group to compare against. They gave them beta-carotene, and they found that the marker of oxidative stress, the malondialdehyde, decreased in the supplemented group compared to baseline by 16%. So I would say, you know, we all can benefit from some degree of supplementation. And again, these studies used isolated compounds of different vitamins, and in this one, a carotenoid, but I think that complexity serves us best. So having a broad array of diverse different compounds working together is the way to go. Okay, so what do you do for with food and nutrients if your patient has SNPs for phase 2 detox enzymes? Well, first and foremost, you know, usually when we think of phase 2, we think of protein, amino acids. Let's get them in the body. But one of the things that some of us forget about is that our patients are probably getting protein. They're probably not digesting it well. And at least that's what I've seen. I mean, I could do a whole presentation on achlorhydria or hypochlorhydria because it's rampant. And so people are eating all of these great, good, expensive, healthy foods and not digesting and breaking them down properly and not assimilating, not actually taking them into the body. So really important to be looking at a 5R type of digestive program with patients with phase 2 SNPs to be sure that they're adequately digesting the protein that they're taking in. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of break out the different types of SNPs within phase 2 because there's much more complexity here. And unlike the cytochromes, which I put into one big basket, but you know there are some delineations there, but I still think because they're a little bit more complex and inducible, what I'm going to do with the phase 2 is segment these accordingly. So if you have patients who need support for methylation, you'd be looking at some of the primary SNPs would be, as I mentioned before, COMT and MTHFR. You may need to use functional biomarkers to support whether or not there is a need or maybe the body is compensating for these SNPs. And also evaluate symptoms, right? I think that's really key. So some other things to be looking at would be hormone imbalance and whether or not their intake of heavy metals is high, because many of the metals are actually methylated. So if they're not methylating properly, they're not getting these heavy metals out. So I did a lot of research taking on this last year for Genova, going through all the different dietary strategies for methylation. And so some of the ones that I feel more comfortable with are high intake of folate-rich green vegetables. This is pretty standard across the board. Mediterranean diet was also helpful, but this is more in light of homocysteine. Ensuring adequate intake of all the different adjunctive cofactors and nutrients that are required for methylation. I don't think, if I think of supplementation, I think that within the functional medicine sphere, it's almost like methylation has become kind of this darling, and it's such a hot topic. And I don't think that levels have to go so high in terms of supplementation. I think that you can see a lot of backlash from that. So I usually like to keep focused on diet and lifestyle strategies, having modest supplementation of things like 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate and the whole complex of different B vitamins, of course, and then monitoring from there. Glutathione is another key one. We focus so much on methylation, we lose sight of the mother antioxidant, which is glutathione. And there are a variety of different glutathione as transferases to monitor. And what you want to do here is not just look at the SNPs, but also check gamma glutamyl transferase activity. When that goes high, it brings glutathione low in the body. So this is where you'll see a lot of depletion, where people have a lot of fatigue, energy loss. And so be thinking here of patients with liver damage, alcohol abuse, oxidative stress, things of that nature. So what do you do for these patients? Well, and this again comes from the article that we put together looking at the different foods, looking at cruciferous vegetables, allium vegetables. These things ramp up glutathione production in the body. Dr. Johanna Lampe has done tremendous research on this, even in people with SNPs, showing that we can override a lot of these SNPs by bringing in cruciferous vegetables. So the ones that are bolded here have clinical data behind them. The ones that aren't bolded have animal work. And you're going to have these slides, so you're going to have access to all these different foods. There are things that inhibit as well as induce. And so things that inhibit glutathione would be apiaceous vegetables, and there is clinical work for that, and quercetin and genistein. Okay, let's move on to glucuronidation. You'll be thinking about this for sure, because so many people taking medications use this route in order to get things out of the body. And so what happens is different substances, and even estrogen is glucuronidated, sent out through the bile, out through the small intestine, and then you hope that those things get excreted and not reabsorbed if all is well in the gut. And so be thinking about this for patients taking medications, those who do maybe not have good bile flow or have liver issues, maybe have hormone imbalance, or maybe even just have constipation, so they're not getting these things out of the body. So nutrient inducers, very similar here. Cruciferous vegetables, resveratrol, citrus, and then a number of other things which have been tested in animal models, which you can see here. One of the things that really spoke to me here was how often tea is a detox substance. In all different teas, it's not just green tea. I think in nutrition, we fall in love with certain things and we kind of hang around them for a long time. And so, green tea is one of those things. Extra virgin olive oil is another one of those things. Kale is another one of those things. But we don't see that there's complexity. And so I would encourage you to focus on several different botanical type of teas when you're working with your patients in detox. They're really powerful. If we look at the starting material for glucuronidation, look at D-glucaric acid, there are certain foods that provide a pretty good amount of this substance to help us with glucuronidation. So I have those foods listed here for you. All right, so what do you do if you have a patient who now, thinking about phase 3, is not adequately eliminating? It's such a basic question, and I'm sure you already have strategies, so I'm going to breeze through this. Adequate fiber is really key. one of the clinical things that I've noticed is if people increase their fiber because they start taking a fiber powder or just eating more legumes or nuts or whatever it is, if they don't increase water, they actually get more constipated. So they have to track fiber and water together. Fermented foods can be good just for repopulating the gut with good flora. Whole plant-based foods are also just good because of the fiber that they contain and any kind of probiotic supplementation. In fact, probiotics do a lot of work for us. If we have good gut bacteria, they are offsetting the load of different toxins that are within us. So there was this study, I believe this was in Tanzania. It was in pregnant women and school children, and basically they gave these groups of children and women either yogurt or whole milk. And they looked at the levels of arsenic in their blood, and they found that the children and women that were given the yogurt fared much better than the women that were given the whole milk, that they actually had lower amounts of arsenic and mercury over time. So those probiotics are important. And also, all the different fibers are preventing the resorption from the glucuronidation and all the different transformed metabolites that are trying to make their way out of the gut. So in this particular study, they were looking at estrogen sulfate and how it fell with using wheat bran specifically and with senna. Now, I think that you can use many different fibers, right? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Vitamin C and magnesium can also be helpful for reducing constipation. Okay, heavy metals. Heavy metals, I'm going to go a little bit faster through this section. I just wanted you to have some exposure to this for some of you who don't use oral or IV chelators. What can you do to chelate metals in the body? So here's the laundry list of different things that have been relatively well researched. You'll notice that it's a lot of greens, right? A lot of greens with a lot of fiber that binds to the toxins. High sulfur as well. So again, bringing in more of the alliums, the brassicas are important for helping with glutathione. And if we're helping with the other pathways, we're going to get these metals out of the body anyway. Keep in mind here's a clinical pearl. Have patients rotate fibers. All the different fibers have different effects in the body. So they're all kind of personalized. They're all very different in what they bind to. So, for example, in vitro studies showed that alginic acid increased lead, pectin, agar, and carrageenan increased cadmium. Wheat bran binds mercury, cadmium, and lead. What I have also seen is that when people do the same fiber over and over again, they actually become intolerant. So keep that in mind, that in addition to wanting the complexity of the different metals that you're binding, you also want to prevent any kind of intolerance. And don't forget the water here. Really, really important. So when I mentioned kind of tongue-in-cheek about extra virgin olive oil being one of the nutritional darlings, it's because I think about the complexity of the different oils too, and sesame oil specifically when it comes to heavy metal toxicity. And I just happen to know that sesame products in general, whether it's sesamin or sesamol, all of these different phytonutrients, they help with hepatic oxidation of fats. They actually help with fatty liver and general liver health. So really good to incorporate some of these other oils. Spirulina has been great in terms of, if you look at some of the literature, what it's been shown to do for reducing toxicants, especially heavy metals, and you'll see a whole list of different things here. I thought I'd bring this in, just rice products in general. I don't know if you've seen this term, rice-a-beetus. And what you're seeing in the literature here, you could say, well, is the intake of rice and the commensurate increase in diabetes due to the fact that it's high in glycemic load, or is it because there's high arsenic? Well, the researchers here would propose that there might be a combination of both, and it may actually even be the arsenic a little bit more than the glycemic load. So just to be aware of that, I'm bringing that into the mix of talking about metals here. So what do you do about that? I found this study on folic acid that I thought was really interesting, that 800 micrograms, but not a lower amount of folic acid, lowered blood amounts of arsenic to a greater extent than placebo. And that was sustained even after cessation, after doing a 12-week supplement regimen. Curcumin is also great. So many different studies. You know, turmeric is a root. All roots, when they're in the earth, they're absorbing onto the metals. So they know how to bind. This is very similar with sea plants. So that's a blessing and a curse, right? Because it can work in our bodies to take things out. But we also have to be sure that whatever we're taking in, the form of curcumin, has to be a good source, because otherwise it could be contaminated. So some really nice studies there. And this really speaks to the contamination factor of spices and herbs. So yeah, we have a pharmacy in all of our kitchens with our spices, but if those spices are toxic, then they don't serve us. And oftentimes spices are in plastic bottles. They're filled with mycotoxins. Some of that work has been coming out in the research, and I've been monitoring that. So definitely have patients be looking at their spices, making sure that they get rid of things within 2 years' time. And for some spices that are ground, they have even shorter shelf life. So in some cases, 6 months. Here's just a simple case of using cilantro soup and preparing the cilantro very specifically and through the heat of the dynamic of heat and creating the soup and having it over time, seeing reduced mercury levels. Now, you don't get the same effect, it seems, from having this as a fresh salad. So when I say cilantro, this is the leafy, parsley-looking cilantro, right? Oftentimes this is called coriander. So cilantro, this is kind of an age-old one, but it's nice to see a case study of this. Sweating is also helpful. You know, I'm trying to punctuate and bring in a little bit of lifestyle as we go here too. Dr. Stephen Jennis has done tremendous work looking at, he calls it the bus study, blood, urine, and sweat. And sweat was one of the ways that we get most things out of the body. And it's passive. We don't even have to think about it. We just have to sit there and be warm. So here are some of the metals that were released more extensively in sweat compared with urine. Now, if I'm thinking about metals in the way of pathways, and this is the fourth pathway that I wanted to speak about, I think about the level of metallothionein in the body. So metallothionein is a protein that binds metals, so basically divalent cations. So it could be a heavy metal, it can also be a mineral. And so what we see from the studies here is that it is inducible, and there are certain nutrients that induce it. So something as simple as zinc can help to induce metallothionein. All right, so how can we use nutrition to support patients exposed to persistent organic pollutants? First, look at their dietary history. Look at if they're eating more conventional rather than organic produce. Have they recently lost weight? Here are some foods to be looking at on their food log. People that have lost more weight over time or are just naturally going to have more pops running around in their blood versus people that actually have gained more weight and haven't lost it, because these things are sitting around in the fat tissue. Gastric bypass also leads to increased amounts of organochlorines in the body. So here after surgery, almost a 400% increase. So note that fascinating study here, organic meat is not free of POPs. This study looked at 76 samples of meat, and this was done in Europe. And so you would think that in the European Union that they have a cleaner supply. Essentially what they found was that the organic and conventional meat products were essentially similar in terms of their POPs. So you can reduce pesticides of fruits by washing it, mechanically scrubbing, There were some other methods that were looked at in this study, but essentially I have patients really focus on that, just scrubbing and washing with some kind of biodegradable soap. Just bringing back spirulina into this conversation too is another green that can be helpful. Vitamin C can help with reducing persistent organic pollutants even in healthy people. So 1 gram of vitamin C per day for 2 months reduced different PCBs and different OCPs. So great news there. Chlorella is great because it's safe, and it's been shown to reduce dioxin in breast milk. Rice bran fiber is also a great binder of different polychlorinated compounds and carcinogens. Really some nice research there has been used extensively in Japan. This is a newer one. Organic honey has been shown to reverse pesticide-induced genotoxicity. So it actually helps to protect against toxins and the effects of toxins. Chlorella detoxes heterocyclic amines. So we see that with supplementation to healthy women. I also have a section here on plastics. So when we reduce plastics in our diet through the containers and such, we can get a quick drop in their levels in the body. So looking at the containers, this is one easy lifestyle strategy that we can bring in and talk with patients about. So where do we start? Okay, I'm just going to kind of summarize this for us. So the different steps of detox. So identifying the sources of contaminants, protecting the body against toxicant damage, eliminating those things, supporting the pathways, and then reevaluating with labs. So starting with food first, just again to come back to basics, getting rid of those offenders, removing all of the different things from the diet that are just really taxing the immune system and creating inflammation. And don't forget to add to the diet as well the different nutrients and the different components that are going to be very nourishing. I also talk about eating according to the body rhythms. So during a detox, I like to have a smoothie that's nutrient dense for the morning, and then a raw lunch with some kind of protein, and then a cooked dinner. Okay, and don't forget that it's not just the foods that we select, but how we prepare them. And a food can become toxic through cooking. So using the proper cookware is key. In fact, this is a picture from one of my scuffed pans. You don't want to be using things like that. And that was a very expensive pan that said that it would not chip. So looking at our cookware is just as important as looking at our food. Avoiding plastic, which is going to be key for reducing those plasticizers, right? So no plastic bags, no plastic spice bottles, and really trying to reduce that. When I'm thinking of bringing in foods that are more nutrient focused and specific to the detox pathways, here's a list of some of the ones that we found from the research, which have been summarized here for you. I also like to make detox fun by incorporating color. And so sometimes just tracking the color of these plant foods is also a great activity. And then for the more complex patients, you might have to bring in other levels of supplements. And so, of course, we want patients to change their diet, but if they can't, I do think that it's important to bring in different supplements to give them relief in the process. And note that many supplements, if we're not looking into the quality of these supplements, that we can get very contaminated supplements that we could be taking. So make sure that whoever you're getting your supplements from, that they have quality control measures to assess that. I actually did have a patient who I wanted to see, I knew he was not very dietary compliant, so wanted to see if bringing in a detox powder could be helpful for him. And it was great because it actually led to resolution of a number of his different symptoms and gave him the energy to go on and to do more, and gave him that confidence factor as well. So what I have found detoxes to do for patients when I'm looking at diet and lifestyle is a number of different things. It's all very different in terms of the patients and how they've responded, but everything from brain fog to energy and fatigue issues, better sleep, reducing stress. It's been quite profound. I'm sure you've seen this in your practices as well. So one simple change in food is full of great, big, huge potential. And again, just making one small change, whether we're sweating more, we're eating better, we're taking something out of the diet, is going to help long term. All right, I do want to just mention that I've done a lot of these online detox programs now, and I did one in combination with the Institute for Functional Medicine. And we just did an elimination diet, whole foods, no supplements, and lifestyle approach, and had people do the medical symptom questionnaire before and after. And what we found was that, improvement in all the different body systems, especially if we look at the top three: emotions, energy, and body weight. So we were pretty happy to see that. And again, it speaks to the power of food and lifestyle and what that can do. All right, I'm going to end there, Michael. I'm going to bring you back and see if we have any questions here.
Thank you, Dr. Minnick. That was a terrific presentation, just chock full of tons of information. And we've already received a lot of good feedback. I just want to remind everyone that the PowerPoint will be available on our website in PDF format, as well as a video of it as well. And we did receive quite a few clinical questions. So I was just going to start with, you mentioned talking about medical detox powder. What's something that you look for in a detox powder that kind of helps you determine what to go with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I look for the amount of protein first and foremost. So I want to be sure that it has adequate protein, something on the order of 12 to 15 grams per serving. And then I also look at specific nutrients that have been added in order to fuel the different phases of detox, specifically phase 2, or even can be bifunctional modulators, meaning that they can straddle both phase 1 and phase 2. So things like broccoli compounds or pomegranate extracts, things of that nature can serve both purposes. Green tea extract that is decaffeinated is also good. But I like a whole panorama of different things. Gosh, looking at, it's not just about the protein and the phytonutrients, those are kind of my first go-tos, but then I'm also looking at the vitamin and mineral core and making sure that the amounts of vitamins are sufficient for what I think is adequate, and that the forms of the vitamins and minerals that are used are also those that I think are going to be better absorbed. So, and it also, I would say, this is always, I guess for me comes last, but for the patient comes first. It has to taste good. In the one case that I showed, kind of went by quickly, but that patient had a lot of difficulty with making dietary changes because of palatability and really getting used to a certain taste. And so I tried a product with him that I knew would taste good and also help with detoxification. So those are some things I look for. And I also like to bring in sometimes even an additional phytonutrient powder into a detox powder, because again, I just think that we're missing out on the complexity of these different plant compounds on a daily basis.
Great. And you also talked a lot about diet and lifestyle approaches to levels of toxicity. When do you consider more of a direct approach to sort of remove metals and things, other toxins like that?
So what would be a direct approach for metals specifically? Is that what I'm getting as the question?
Yeah, when might you consider in a patient something more like a chelation approach?
Okay. So yeah, if you do testing and you see that multiple metals are elevated, that's something where first start foundational, that, identify the source, back to kind of the flow of how I think about this. Identify the source of where these things are coming from and eliminate those from the environment as best as possible. And then protect the body with nutrients, right? And make sure that you're doing what you can to offset a lot of the oxidative stress. Because doing an oral or IV chelation process is also, there's some risk of recirculation of these different metals too. So you want to be sure that the body is well protected and that you know the sources before moving into something much more rigorous. And then also having, throughout that process, nutrients as the buffer and as the context for the whole process of doing that. So, I think if somebody had really, the person who's tried everything, right, where their diet's really clean and they've changed their lifestyle, they're even using a sauna, they're doing everything they can, but yet they still have elevated levels of cesium or, uranium or whatever it is. I think that at that point where you've made all of those modifications, it would be best, or under the clinician's guidance, of course, depending on the patient, to be looking into more aggressive strategies like you're mentioning. So doing something more like the oral or IV chelation, and not everybody can do that in their practice, but for people that can, there's a way to do it to make it safe, and I think it can be worthwhile for certain patients, for sure.
Great. Thank you for that. And in the interest of time, we will end our question and answer period there. For additional educational materials, we'd like to encourage you to visit our website, www.gdx.net. On this site, you'll find sample reports, kit instructions, and other information for all our profiles. And finally, we'd like to encourage you to look for upcoming webinars on www.gdx.net. And thanks again so much, Dr. Minnick, for a really great presentation.
Oh, thank you for having me. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.